What's up, YouTubers? This is J-Dreamers coming at you with another video. I'll be talking about uh, Gulliver's Travels and how that story relates to me, to the world that we find ourselves in today. If you've never read Gulliver's Travels, I'm going to break it down real quick. Basically, there's 4 stories in this guy Gulliver's Travels. In story number 1, he gets shipwrecked and he ends up on an island called Lilliput. And on this island are little 6-inch humans just like him, but he's basically a giant in their world. And so he has to interact with these tiny beings and in a very tiny world. In the second book, Gulliver ends up on an island full of giants compared to him. Now he's the small one, and everything that he sees is gigantic in comparison to himself. In the third book, Gulliver finds a floating island way up in the sky. It's a whole nother land above, and it can actually move around, and it basically moves over the lands below. And in the fourth book, Gulliver finds himself on a weird island that basically has civilized horses that take him in. And there are other beings just like Gulliver there, known as Yahoos. And they climb up into trees and defecate on him to attack him. And they're just crazy, like, humanoid beings. And Gulliver really enjoys his time with the horses, but when he's returned to England, he sees all the civilized Yahoos around him and he just can't stand being with them, so he goes out and buys some horses and lives happily ever after. So that is the short version of Gulliver's Travels. But I really want to focus on the first 2 books, The Land of the Giants and The Land of Lilliput, or the Shrunken Land. We also see the same theme in Alice in Wonderland, where Alice goes back and forth between seeing the world and everything's gigantic and huge and enormous, and then growing herself and being in a very small, tiny world. So, what do we have so far in piecing our story together? If this is my first video, please do go check out a few of my other videos in the Flat Earth realm. That way you have a better understanding of what I'm about to explain. So, we've come across mountains of evidence that things used to be much bigger on the realm that we live in. I mean, plants grew to enormous sizes. We've seen There Are No Trees on the Flat Earth video, where basically all the mesas in the world are cut down giant trees that once existed. And it's been acknowledged that our world was once a paradise, a garden paradise at that. And animals were bigger, people were bigger, and then we've also brought in the talk of giant gods or giant beings, humanoid beings. So, if things were so much bigger a long time ago, and so gigantic a long time ago, then that must mean that we are smaller today. So our world, our realm has gone through a shrinking process. The plants are not as big, so they have shrunk. The people are not as big, so we have shrunk. I wonder, have we become the Lilliputians? Is our little puddle that we live on, our small realm, on the flat earth realm, our little circle, is it the land of Lilliput now? Was it once a land of giants? Well, if we are shrinking, how did we get to this point? Well, I think of the question, well, how do things grow to great sizes? Well, from my research, it seems to me that in an oxygen-rich environment where plants or animals can breathe deeply and are surrounded by a much more concentrated form of oxygen than we have today, because we have very little oxygen in our atmosphere today. That oxygen is what helps to make things grow and expand into large sizes. People have added pure oxygen to vegetables and seen like miraculous results as they've grown to gigantic sizes. So I think our atmosphere was more dense in oxygen. I think there was so much more oxygen back in this garden paradise. So, what caused us to shrink? I wonder if the removal of most of that oxygen to the amount that we have today had an effect on our growth rate. And I mean plants, animals, humans, etc. So something definitely took the majority of our oxygen away. And that may have caused us to shrink in size. So what could be capable of taking so much oxygen away? Now I'm going to be talking about this from a flat earth perspective, especially a flat earth realm that continues on past the ice wall into other realms. Now, I'm in favor, this is why I'm in favor right now, of a dome being above our particular realm. Because if all of this oxygen was taken away, if there was no enclosure, then I would guess all the other oxygen would just flood in and replace it. So we wouldn't have too much of a difference. Unless all of the oxygen has been taken away all across all realms. But that doesn't feel right to me. So, I'm in favor of a closed system and a certain amount of oxygen having been within that system, and somehow it's been depleted. So, we have this dome, which I'll talk about for 2 seconds. To me, it looks like exactly like silica aerogel. I think the dome is made out of silica aerogel. Check out my video on that if you want to know more about it. And another thing is the dome blocks whatever's really out there. And according to what Gulliver experienced, there was land above, just floating in place. Now, is it so hard to imagine that there may be actual lands above us? Well, we think about gravity and we think of all the things we've been taught about stuff, and we would picture that land falling on top of us. But those of us in the flat earth realm, we acknowledge that the sun is much closer. And I'm going to talk about the sun, or the skylight as I call it. Something made that. Something created that moonlight, that nightlight, and that skylight. And something placed it right up in the sky, and it just moves around, and it doesn't fall on top of us. So, is it that much more of a leap that there could be actual lands and realms above us? I don't think so. So, what can get rid of so much oxygen? My first thought when I thought about oxygen being depleted or being sucked out of an environment was fire. Fire can definitely suck out the oxygen in something, because fire needs oxygen. And what's the biggest form of fire that I could think of? Now, some people think that there may have been some sort of worldwide fire, and I'm not going to toss that out. But there's a constant fire that constantly burns, that's been around and goes all the way around every day. That's right. You guessed it. The sun, aka the skylight. So this giant fireball in our sky, in my opinion, maybe eating up all of our oxygen. I mean, especially if it's been there for thousands and thousands of years. So that's my theory on where the oxygen went, how the oxygen or lack of oxygen helped us to shrink in size, what took away the oxygen, and now I want to talk about where did this skylight come from? Somebody built it. Somebody made it. Now, religious people would just jump straight to God and just say, well, God made it and God put it there, etc., etc. But if there is a dome above, especially if it's made out of silica aerogel, somebody made that dome. And it stands to reason that it's possible if someone made a dome, that somebody made the sun or the skylight that's inside of that dome. Now, I lean towards the sun, the skylight being inside of it. And silica aerogel, by the way, if you look it up, it's like the best thing to keep out heat, okay? So this heat is going to be kept within the dome. It's not going to escape. Anyways, that's besides the point. So somebody built the skylight and the nightlight that we call the moon. And maybe even what we call planets may have been earlier attempts at skylights, and then they were pushed aside. I don't know. But why introduce a massive artificial light into an enclosed environment? Well, I speculated before, imagined with my creativity, and using the facts at hand, which is the world I live in, that titanic beings, the titans of old, I don't mean the giants that were a little smaller that came after, I mean the titans, came to our realm at some point, scraped it out, and tore down all of the huge life forms that once flourished and existed. Mainly the giant trees that we've talked about. Now, I have this strong feeling that most of the life on our realm at that point in time, before it was torn down, had a form of bioluminescence. And I don't think that we had any need for any types of skylights, because I believe that our world was self-lit. And with the tearing down of this world came the extinguishing of that bio-light. So the world became dark, and whoever was here working on our world needed light to continue their work. So perhaps the titans that came here to excavate our world, probably in order to create something more on their world, or in their realm, I think they created the sun and the moon, and I think that they may have placed them here to act as artificial light because they themselves took away the bioluminescent world. It became too dark for them to work. So they put up this light. Now, to me, this explains why the sun... Hold on. I had to get a visual. All right. So this explains to me why the sun moves in these odd circles. Why does it get tight right here and then get bigger and bigger out towards the edges? Here is one idea that I had today. What if these titans came from the edges, right? Maybe they scoped it out or what have you, and then more of them came because they're from the outside, especially in this area. Say they came from here, and they started to tear things down, or wherever they came from. And then they decided they needed this artificial light. So they placed it here, and maybe they placed a few of them, or a couple of them. And they made them go in rotation so they didn't stay in one place and burn them. And so they would go in rotation around the outer edges because they were working their way from the outer to the inside, where most of this land is, right? So they went to the inside, and then they adjusted that light to move in tighter circles on the inside. And then when they left or went back out, they brought that with them. And perhaps it stayed moving in that pattern. So Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time.